Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. What are you going to do with something that doesn't fit the mold? The Gospel of John does not fit the mold of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you laid out the outline for Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those outlines would fit each other very nicely. John's doesn't fit at all. John's outline has Jesus moving all over the place. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have Jesus in Galilee for all of his ministry, and then at one point deciding to go to Jerusalem, going down to Jerusalem, suffering, dying, rising again, and going back to Galilee. John's gospel has Jesus up in Galilee, down Jerusalem, up in Galilee, down Jerusalem. At one point, down it says he came back to Jerusalem, but never said he left Jerusalem in the first place. It's got him all over the place. There's a possibility, and I think it's a probability, some would argue with that, but I think it's a probability that John has no intention whatsoever of being chronological until you get to the Passion account. Up until the Passion account, I don't think he's chronological. I think what he's doing is presenting a thematic look at Jesus' life. And the theme that I think is there, and that I'm going to take you through in the next couple of weeks, the theme that I think is there is a theme of replacement. That Jesus replaces those things of old Israel. Last week, we kind of walked you through that last verse of chapter 1 of John. And if you didn't listen to last week's Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School, you might want to go back and get that one. Jesus is saying in the last verse there that he is the place where God touches his world, not the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple. That he is God's touchstone with this earth. And so we're introduced to this idea of replacement, that Jesus replaces the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple. The next story is a very familiar story, and I think we kind of miss the point a lot of times. And by the way, last time we were up to the 4th day of this unfolding revelation, and John chapter 2 begins with, on the 3rd day. Does this mean it's Tuesday, because the Jewish calendar would have began on a Sunday? Or does this mean it's the 3rd day after the other 4, which means we've got 7 days of Revelation, which means we've got a similar thing to 7 days of creation back in Genesis? Quite possible. It's the wedding at Cana. If somebody asks you what's Jesus' first miracle, everybody would probably say the wedding at Cana. John doesn't call it a miracle. John calls it a sign. I'm not positive his first miracle, because if John's not chronological, then, and the other gospel writers do not record this event at Cana. But let's look deeper at it. On the 3rd day, there was a marriage at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the marriage with his disciples. A wedding celebration sometimes went on for the whole week. When the wine failed, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Apparently, she thinks he's going to do something about that. Jesus said to her, this one always bothered me. Jesus said to her, "Oh, woman, what have you to do with me?" If I said to my mother, "Oh, woman, what have you to do with me?" even at my age, she might still smack me. But that actually was a term of respect as he uses it. In other words, this is not my problem. My hour has not yet come, and now we're introduced to another theme in John's gospel, and that is Jesus' hour. And eventually he will talk about his hour of glory. And what we're going to discover is that his hour of glory, which you might think is the resurrection or the ascension, is the cross. The irony is that when he says, "My hour has come, glorify your Son," it's right before he goes to the cross. So we're going to follow that through, that theme of the hour and the glory. So he says, "My hour has not yet come. Mom, you cannot push me. It's not your timetable, it's my timetable." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." She has an idea he's going to step in and take care of this anyway. Now 6 stone jars were standing there for the Jewish rites of purification. The Jews had all kinds of things that they ceremonially washed, from houses to pots to their own hands. All kinds of things that became ceremonially washed. And these big jars that were sitting there were jars for purification. That they were set aside for that, not to be used for anything else. Jesus said to them, fill the jars with water. Okay, that wouldn't be unusual. They filled them up to the brim. He said to them, now draw some out and take it to the steward of the feast. So they took it. When the steward of the feast tasted the water now become wine, did not know where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward of the feast called the bridegroom, said to him, every man serves the good wine first. And when men have drunk freely, in other words, they don't have as much discernment anymore, then the poor wine, but you've kept the good wine till now. And we're told this is the first of the signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. Those jars are now useless for their original purpose. You know, usually when we read this story, we talk about Jesus likes to party. He likes to get into our daily lives, and he understands what it means to have a good time, and he cares about all aspects of our life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's something deeper going on here, because John points out that these are jars for purification. And Jesus has just filled them with wine, and they're no longer good for purification. They're now just common jars. Because Jesus is the purification. No longer these jars. I think it's a replacement idea again. Throwing out the old and bringing in the new. We're told in 13, the Passover of Jews was at hand. He's down in Jerusalem already. And he casts out the money changers from the temple in that next section. Now here again is where you've got a chronological problem. Either he does it twice, if John's chronological, because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he does it in Holy Week. Or John's not chronological, and he's thematic. John is going to tell you not so much about what Jesus does to cast out the money changers, but he's going to tell you what this means. In verse 18, the Jews said to him, what signs have you to show for doing this? In other words, by what right are you throwing these people out of here? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews said, it's taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he spoke of the temple of his body. And now we have another replacement. Jesus himself replaces the Jerusalem temple. So if you're looking at these themes that come up, first, he shows them how he replaces the Holy of Holies. Then he shows them that he replaces the rite of purification. And now he shows them that he replaces the Jerusalem temple. This would be used as evidence against him later in his trial, by the way, that he was advocating the destruction of the temple. But he's talking about himself as the place where God dwells. John is a phenomenal writer and an amazing, gives you an amazing account of what Jesus is, what he does, and what his ministry means. And I think he's showing you how Jesus replaces the old with the new and with himself. We'll follow that through in future weeks.